In October 1957, a Brazilian farmer named Antonio Villas-Boas went through an experience that is now widely regarded as the first recorded UFO abduction case of the post-war period. 4 months after the incident, Villas-Boas described what had happened to a doctor and a journalist. At a time when reports of UFO landings and encounters with strange beings were usually dismissed without much thought, Antonio's story received very little attention. However, more than 6 decades later, researchers have noticed that his account contains many of the same features that became common in alien abduction reports during the 1980s and 1990s. It was also the first case to suggest a deeply unsettling purpose behind the actions of the alleged abductors. Antonio Villas-Boas was a 23-year-old farmer who lived with his family near the town of São Francisco de Sales in the Brazilian state of Minas Gerais. Shortly after 11 p.m. on October 5, 1957, Antonio was trying to sleep in his bedroom alongside his brother João when he got up to open the window. Looking across the farmyard, he noticed a fluorescent silver glow lighting up a large section of ground, even though he could not identify where the light was coming from. A short time later, the glow began moving in his direction. Startled, he quickly shut the window shutters, waking João in the process. Together, the brothers watched as the light shone through the shutters and even slipped through gaps between the roof tiles before suddenly disappearing. The second sighting happened on the night of October 14th, shortly after 9:30 p.m. Antonio was plowing a field with another brother when they spotted a large circular light. It was so bright that looking at it caused discomfort to their eyes. The light had a reddish color and hovered near the northern end of the field at an estimated height of around 100 meters, illuminating the ground beneath it. Antonio felt there was a solid object hidden behind the glow. When he tried moving closer, the light suddenly shifted to the southern side of the field. He attempted to approach it about 20 times, but each time it changed position before he could get near. For some time afterward, the light occasionally sent rays outward in every direction. Then it appeared to disappear completely, as Antonio later described it, as though it had been turned out. The following night, October 15th, Antonio was working alone in the field. At around 1 a.m., he noticed a red star in the clear night sky. It seemed to be growing larger as it rapidly approached his position. Before long, he could make out an elongated egg-shaped object that emitted an intense pale red glow. The object stopped directly above his tractor before descending to a height of approximately 50 meters. The entire area became illuminated with a powerful pale red light that made the surroundings appear almost as bright as daytime. The object then moved to a position about 10 to 15 meters in front of the tractor and slowly continued its descent. At that point, Villas-Boas could see more details. The egg-shaped craft was surrounded by small purple-colored lights and had a square-shaped metal structure extending from each side. 3 metal spikes projected from the front of the object in a horizontal row. Above the 2 outer spikes were circular reddish lights, while above the center spike was a powerful red light that resembled a headlamp. Antonio believed this was the source of the intense glow he had noticed earlier. The upper section of the craft resembled a shallow dome that rotated around its own axis. As it spun, the dome produced a strong red fluorescent light. When the craft approached the ground, the glow shifted from red to green, and the spinning motion gradually slowed. Before landing, 3 metal supports extended from beneath the object, forming a tripod. Seeing this, Villas-Boas attempted to drive his tractor away. He only managed to move a few meters before the engine suddenly stopped and the tractor's lights went dark. He immediately began running. Moments later, someone seized his arm from the side. The figure was fully covered by a suit and helmet and stood roughly at shoulder height compared to Antonio. As he struggled to break free, 3 additional figures wearing similar outfits approached. These individuals were taller and lifted him off the ground. Villas-Boas shouted and fought back. He later noticed something unusual. Every time he spoke, the 4 figures paused briefly and looked directly at his face. The beings wore close-fitting full-body suits made from a thick gray material with several black bands around the arms and legs. The suits connected directly to helmets of the same color. Only their light bluish eyes were visible through two circular openings in the helmets. The upper portions of the helmets appeared unusually large above the eye level. 3 silver tubes, each about the thickness of a garden hose, extended from the lower rear section of each helmet and curved downward into the back of the suit. On the center of the chest was a small circular red emblem that reflected light. A strip of silvery material connected this emblem to a wide belt that appeared to have no visible buckle or fastening mechanism. The sleeves blended directly into thick, 5-fingered gloves made of the same material. Likewise, the pant legs joined seamlessly with tennis-style shoes that had soles 2 or 3 inches thick and curved upward at the front. The figures carried Villas-Boas toward the craft, which was hovering about 2 meters above the ground. Near the rear of the object was an open entrance. The door extended outward horizontally, resembling the drawbridge of a castle. Attached to the edge of this door was a ladder that appeared to be made from the same silvery metal as the outer hull of the craft. The figures forced Antonio onto the ladder. As he struggled, he realized the ladder was strangely flexible, swaying from side to side beneath him. Taken aboard the UFO, Antonio found himself inside a small square chamber made fully of polished metal. Along the upper edges of the walls and across the ceiling were multiple small square lights fitted directly into the surface. The beings placed him down as the door lifted and sealed shut again, blending so well with the surrounding walls that no outline could be seen at all. 5 of the entities were now around him. One of them signaled with a hand gesture for him to move toward an open doorway across from where he had entered. He stepped into a larger room with a soft oval shape. It had the same polished metal walls and lighting, along with a single column in the middle. On one side stood an unusual table, surrounded by stool-like chairs made of white metal. He stayed still as the 5 beings appeared to communicate with each other, using what he described as slow barking and yelping sounds. The sound stopped, and the beings suddenly grabbed him and began removing his clothing. One of them then approached holding a damp sponge and spread a clear, thick liquid over his body. It dried quickly and did not feel oily. 3 of the beings guided him into another room by opening a door that split into 2 halves after pressure was applied at its center. Above it were glowing red symbols that seemed to float a short distance in front of the frame. He entered a square-shaped room, and the door once again sealed into the wall with no visible edges. Shortly after, 2 more beings entered carrying thick red tubes. Each tube had a glass container shaped like a chalice on one end and a cupping device on the other. One of them forced air out of the tube and placed the cupping end under Antonio's chin. He felt suction as the glass filled halfway with a dark liquid resembling blood. The second device was placed on the other side of his chin and filled even more. After this, the beings left, and the door closed behind them. At the points where the devices had touched his skin, dark marks formed that itched and burned, and they remained visible for months. He was left alone in a room containing a large gray structure that looked like a couch or bed. Soon after, he noticed a strong smell similar to burning painted fabric. He saw metal rods sticking out from the walls, with small holes releasing gray smoke into the room. He became nauseous and vomited into a corner. After some time, a sound drew his attention. In the doorway stood a naked woman. He described her as extremely attractive, but unusual in several ways. Her skin was pale like that of a light-skinned Brazilian woman, and her hair was straight, bleached blonde, with inward curls at the ends. Her underarm and pubic hair were bright red, and her arms were covered in freckles. Her eyes were large and blue, stretched outward at the corners, and angled slightly downward toward the center. She had high cheekbones, a broad face, and a pointed chin. Her body was slim, with a narrow waist, wide hips, and large thighs. Her hands were long and narrow, and her feet were small. He estimated that the helmet she wore earlier would have made her height reach about his chin level. and he became convinced she was the same being that had first grabbed him outside the craft. The woman suddenly embraced him, rubbing her head against his face. He reported feeling a level of arousal unlike anything before. They then had sexual contact. The woman made a few grunting sounds, which led him to feel she was more animal-like than human. After it ended, the door opened again, and one of the suited beings called her. Before leaving, she turned toward Antonio, pointed at her stomach, then at him, and finally toward the sky, while smiling slightly. One of the beings returned his clothes and led him back into the oval room, where others were now seated on the stools. A third doorway stood slightly open. From inside, he heard sounds similar to someone moving around. On the table was a square device with a glass cover protecting what looked like a clock face. It had a hand and markings at the 3, 6, and 9 positions, plus 4 small marks near the 12 position. He noticed one of the beings looking at it several times, but the hand never moved. When Antonio picked it up, one of the beings quickly took it back and placed it on the table again. Eventually, one of the entities stood up and signaled for him to follow. They walked back through the entry room and exited the craft through the outer door, then along a walkway running around the exterior. Along the hull, he saw reddish square lights in places where he had earlier noticed purple ones. The being pointed toward 3 metal spikes at the front of the craft. At that moment, the objects emitted a faint, pale red glow. The walkway ended in front of a thick, foggy glass panel that looked like a windshield. The crew member lifted his hand and pointed toward the top section of the craft, where a large disc was rotating slowly. It was now lit with a green fluorescent tone. Villas-Boas also heard a steady, high-pitched sound, similar to a vacuum cleaner. Both of them then walked back toward the entry point, and the crew member signaled for Antonio to go down the ladder. Once he reached the ground, Antonio saw the being point at him, then at the ground, and then toward the southern sky before motioning him to step away. The figure went back into the craft, and the door closed. The ladder rungs folded inward and vanished into the surface. The landing legs pulled into the UFO as it lifted off. The top section began spinning faster, shifting through several colors before turning bright red. A loud humming and whining sound filled the air as the craft changed direction quickly, then shot off toward the south at extreme speed. Villas-Boas also thought he noticed a control surface move during the turn. After the craft left, he returned to his tractor and discovered the battery had been disconnected. It was just before sunrise, and he estimated the entire encounter lasted from about 1:15 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. He felt exhausted and weak, then slept until around 4:30 in the afternoon. He was able to eat dinner later that day. In the following nights, the experience kept returning in his dreams and waking him up. He also dealt with nausea, headaches, and a loss of appetite. On the second night, he experienced a burning feeling in his eyes, which became stronger the next day. Over the next month, he remained unusually sleepy and often dozed off during the day. The day after the incident, Antonio went back to the site and measured the distance between 3 marks left on the ground. From those measurements, he estimated the craft was about 10.6 meters, 35 feet long, and around 7 meters, 23 feet, wide at the rear. 8 days later, he hit his forearm and developed a bruise that bled, became infected, and itched. When it healed, it left a purple mark. In the following days, similar wounds appeared on their own on his arms and legs, each leaving behind purple patches that lasted for months. About 15 days later, pale yellow spots appeared on both sides of his nose. In November 1957, Villas-Boas read articles by João Martins about Brazilian UFO cases in the magazine O Cruzeiro. He wrote 2 letters to Martins and also sent a carved wooden model of the UFO. A little over 4 months later, on February 22, 1958, he met Martins, along with physician and ufologist Dr. Olavo T. Fontes in Rio de Janeiro. They carried out more than 4 hours of questioning. Dr. Fontes also performed a medical check, but he could not explain the 2 small dark patches on the chin or the purple marks linked to the wounds. Years later, Dr. Fontes suggested the symptoms might have been caused by radiation exposure, though there was no blood testing at the time to confirm this. Before the February meeting, Villas-Boas had drawn the strange red writing seen above the doorway and included it in a letter to Martins. Years later, a Brazilian doctor named Walter Buehler sent a copy of that drawing to linguist and ufologist Gordon Creighton, though its exact origin remains unclear. During that same visit, Antonio also produced a sketch of the craft itself. After the questioning, Martins said he could not publish the case in O Cruzeiro due to lack of proof and no matching reports. In the end, Dr. Fontes accepted Villas-Boas's account, while Martins did not. Creighton later suggested that Fontes and Martins may have agreed not to publish the case under pressure from U.S. or Brazilian intelligence services. In July 1961, Buehler and Dr. Mario Prudente Aquino traveled to São Francisco de Sales and asked Villas-Boas to make 2 additional drawings of the craft. Buehler later included the testimony in his personal bulletin and shared it with the Brazilian Society for the Study of Flying Saucers, as well as the Flying Saucer Review, which chose not to publish it. Later, Gordon Creighton published a series of articles in the Flying Saucer Review starting in 1965. Around the same period, the case was also discussed in O Cruzeiro. Creighton eventually gathered the material into a chapter in The Humanoids, published in 1969. Villas-Boas continued to worry that the woman's gestures meant he would be taken again to the being's home. Dr. Fontes suggested instead that the gestures meant she would have his child in her own world, which eased his concern. A few years later, Antonio married, had children, and later worked as a lawyer. He refused interviews for many years, only agreeing to appear on Brazilian television in 1978 to correct several incorrect versions of his story. Apart from that, he avoided speaking about it, even with family. He maintained his account until his death on January 17, 1991. At the time, his story was widely doubted. However, after the Betty and Barney Hill case in 1961 brought the idea of alien abduction into public awareness, many saw Villas-Boas's account as an earlier example. Like his case, Betty and Barney Hill reported seeing a UFO before being taken aboard a craft by non-human beings. Pregnancy also appeared in both accounts, with Betty being tested for it. Later abduction reports often included claims of sexual contact between humans and non-human beings or hybrid forms. These themes became common in reports gathered by researchers in the 1980s and 1990s, including John Mack, Bud Hopkins, and David Jacobs. Some modern accounts also describe similar experiences involving extraterrestrial or other dimensional beings. However, other researchers, such as Jacques Vallée, have criticized the heavy reliance on regressive hypnosis in these studies, arguing that it may lead to false or altered memories. Stories involving unions between humans and non-human beings also appear in older religious and mythological traditions. For example, in the 2016 book The Supernatural, co-written by Whitley Strieber and Jeffrey Kripal, accounts are discussed from Indian tantric traditions describing beings of light and airborne palaces with female entities who interact with humans in similar ways. Some medieval Christian thinkers believed humans could reproduce with demons, while certain Islamic scholars described similar ideas involving jinn, beings said to exist alongside humans. In February 1978, ufologist Rich Reynolds was contacted by Bosko Nedeljkovic, who had previously worked with the CIA and the U.S. Department of Defense, and was working in Brazil for USAID at the time of the incident. Nedeljkovic claimed the Villas-Boas case was part of a U.S. intelligence operation linked to Project MKUltra, saying he observed parts of it from a military helicopter and described the use of lorazepam gas on Villas-Boas at the start. Declassified MKUltra documents confirm that the CIA experimented with drugs on unaware individuals. Some researchers, including Helmut and Marion Lammer, have also documented claims of staged military abduction simulations. However, Nedeljkovic did not provide evidence for his claims, and similar intelligence-linked claims have at times been shown to be false or planted to mislead UFO researchers. In 2006, 9 pages of documents were published on the UFO Reality blog detailing Reynolds' correspondence with Nedeljkovic. In his 1956 report on UFOs, Captain Edward Ruppelt of the U.S. Air Force stated that reports of UFO landings and contact cases were often labeled CP for crackpot at the time. Because of this, Villas-Boas's account was largely dismissed in its early years, but it later influenced public interest following the Betty and Barney Hill case in 1961. His story is now often seen as one of the earliest examples of the abduction narrative that later became common in UFO reports during the late 20th century, including the idea that non-human beings might interact with humans in reproductive ways. Recently, people reported strange lights appearing in the sky and moving downward toward the Earth. The sight was unusual, and many said they had never seen anything like it before. Some described the lights as bright, shifting, and moving in ways that did not match known aircraft. Because of this, many began to think the event could be linked to something beyond Earth, possibly advanced technology from another world, or even a UFO visit. Videos of the lights spread quickly online and gained a large amount of attention across social media platforms. People debated what the source could be, with some suggesting natural atmospheric events, and others insisting it was something unknown. Despite the growing public interest, there was no clear response from local or national authorities, and no official explanation was released at the time. Officials have remained silent since, leaving questions unanswered in public discussion so far still. So what are your thoughts on these sightings? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more content.